In this video, we're about to uncover a terrifying truth that could shatter everything you've ever believed about God. Ancient texts and scriptures reveal a shocking reality. The God of the Old Testament might not be the loving creator we've been taught, but a false god, an evil entity known as the Demiurge, who created this world to trap us in suffering and ignorance. This isn't just a controversial idea, it's a direct attack on the foundations of mainstream religion. What if the true divine power has been hidden from us all along and we've been worshiping a tyrant in disguise? The stakes couldn't be higher, and this revelation could change everything you thought you knew. In 1945, a group of unsuspecting farmers made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the foundations of religion. Buried deep in the sands of Egypt, they stumbled upon the Nag Hammadi text. But what they found wasn't just any ancient scripture. It was a collection of writings that would shape the very core of everything we've been taught for centuries. These weren't your ordinary Bible stories. Alongside the Dead Sea Scrolls found just a few years later, these texts contained gospels and writings that had been deliberately hidden, erased from the pages of history by the early church. And the reason? The content was too dangerous, too radical. Some of these writings, even older than the gospels we hold today, tell a story that upends everything we thought we knew about creation and God himself. What if the Bible we know is carefully edited to present a specific narrative chosen by the early church to maintain control? Versions like the King James or New International, all of them curated to tell just one version of the truth. But what they left out, the Gnostic texts, were not removed because they were false, but because they challenged the power and teachings of the church. They were too controversial, and what's hidden in these texts would have shaken the very foundation of mainstream Christianity. The Gnostic writings reveal something shocking, a being called the Demiurge. This being, according to Gnostic belief, isn't the loving creator we've been told about. Instead, he's a false god, a jealous and vindictive creator of the material world. Remember all those stories in the Old Testament where God is filled with rage, jealousy, and destruction. According to the Gnostics, that's not the God of love and light. That's the Demiurge, a being who created the world not out of love, but to trap and imprison souls in ignorance. His goal wasn't salvation, it was control. Think about the Genesis story. Humanity is placed in a garden, given rules, and told not to seek knowledge. When Adam and Eve dared to pursue wisdom, they were cast out and punished. Why would a loving God do that? What if, as the Gnostics claim, the real crime wasn't disobedience, but a pursuit of freedom? According to the Gnostic texts, this false god, the Demiurge, isn't interested in enlightenment. He's here to keep humanity in the dark, trapped in a material world where we never realize our true potential. And here's the kicker, the early Christians knew this. Movements like the Valentinians believe that the God most people worship isn't the true divine force at all. The real creator, they taught, exists beyond this world, and the Demiurge is nothing more than a jailer, a cosmic mistake. But these ideas were too dangerous for the early church. When Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, the church needed a version of faith that would uphold power structures, not one that would tear them down. So the Gnostics were branded as heretics. Their teachings were destroyed, and the truth was buried for nearly 2,000 years. And now, thanks to the discovery of these ancient texts, the other side of the story is finally coming to light. So here's the question we have to ask ourselves. If the Bible was carefully curated, what does that say about the God most people worship? Could it be that the loving, merciful creator in the New Testament and the wrathful, vengeful God of the Old Testament are not the same being? The texts suggest something terrifying. They claim that the world filled with suffering, injustice, and evil wasn't created by a God of love, but by a twisted, lesser being who thinks he's God. And for those who follow these Gnostic teachings, the mission wasn't to obey blindly. It was to break free from the Demiurge's prison. This is where the story of reality begins. The Nag Hammadi texts, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and countless other ancient scriptures all point to one shocking, uncomfortable truth. The God of the Old Testament may not be the true creator. In fact, according to the Gnostics, he might just be the devil in disguise. They believe that the real God, the true divine force, exists beyond this universe, and the God worshipped by most of the world. He's the Demiurge, a false god, an arrogant, blind creator who believes he's the supreme being, but in reality, he's far from it. The Demiurge crafted the material world not out of love or grace, but to imprison souls. He created a world filled with suffering where humanity would remain trapped, unaware of their divine potential. This world, it's a trap, and you and I are stuck in it. The material world is full of suffering, corruption, and pain, and if you look closely, it almost feels like it was designed that way. Now, according to Gnosticism, this isn't by accident. The Demiurge wanted to keep us in ignorance, enslaved by the physical world, constantly distracted by the chaos of everyday life, unable to realize our true potential. The world was built to deceive us, to make us think that this is all there is, and the Demiurge is sitting at the top of this false reality, enjoying his illusion of power. And here's the wild part. The Gnostics didn't just see the Demiurge as a problem. They believe that we have something inside of us that the Demiurge fears, a spark of the true divine. Deep within us is this fragment of higher consciousness, a piece of the divine realm that the Demiurge can't touch. That's why he wants to keep us ignorant, why the whole system of this world is designed to distract and control. He knows that if we wake up to the truth, his grip over us weakens. Now, why would anyone worship a being like this? Because the Demiurge is a master manipulator. He's not just a creator, he's a tyrant. He wants worship, obedience, and fear. He keeps people in line by presenting himself as the ultimate authority, demanding blind faith and submission. And for the most part, it's worked. Most of the world's religious systems, especially the traditional teachings of the Old Testament, reinforce this idea that we're supposed to fear God, submit to his will, and never question his authority. The Gnostics didn't see the Demiurge as the only power in the universe, far from it. Above the Demiurge is the true source of all creation, often referred to as the One or the True God. This being is pure consciousness, pure light, completely removed from the chaos and corruption of the material world. But the Demiurge, he's completely ignorant of this higher reality. He thinks he's the only God because he's blind to anything greater than himself. He's literally trapped in his own illusion of power, and it doesn't stop there. Gnostics also introduced a figure called Sophia, a divine being who plays a key role in this cosmic drama. According to their teachings, Sophia tried to create without the consent of the true God, and the result of her mistake was the Demiurge. Sophia realizes her error and becomes deeply involved in helping humanity wake up from the Demiurge's control. She represents wisdom, enlightenment, and the true path to spiritual liberation. So what does this mean for us? The Gnostics believed that awakening, or Gnosis, was the key. Gnosis is the knowledge of this hidden truth, the realization that the material world is a deception and that we're capable of escaping it. But the Demiurge doesn't want us to find this knowledge. He wants to keep us locked in a cycle of ignorance, constantly distracted by material desires, societal expectations, and fear of punishment. This is where it all starts to connect. In Gnostic thinking, the serpent in the Garden of Eden wasn't the villain of the story. Instead, the serpent represents a force of liberation. It offered humanity knowledge, the very thing the Demiurge didn't want us to have. So Gnostics flipped the entire story of Genesis on its head. In their eyes, the God who told Adam and Eve not to eat from the tree of knowledge wasn't protecting them. He was keeping them ignorant. And the serpent? The serpent was the one trying to wake them up. I know it's wild, but it makes you rethink everything you've been told. If the Demiurge is this tyrannical being, then the whole concept of salvation changes. Salvation isn't about obedience to a higher power. It's about liberation from a false one. The real goal is to break free from the Demiurge's influence, to realize that the material world is a distraction, and to reconnect with the true divine force that exists beyond it. Now here's where things really start to hit home. We've all asked this question at some point. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why is there so much evil and suffering in the world? Why is life filled with pain, disease, natural disasters, and all the stuff that makes us question everything? Well, the Gnostics had a radically different answer to that question. They didn't believe that this world's suffering was just some mystery we can't understand, or that it was part of some divine plan. No, they believed suffering was here because the God who created this world was not good. This wasn't a case of God allowing evil to happen. It was about the world being built on a flawed foundation by a flawed being. The Gnostics saw the creator of this world, the Demiurge, as incompetent or even malevolent. And when you look at the world through that lens, things start to make a strange kind of sense. Think about the big events we know from the Bible, especially the Old Testament. We've got the flood where God wipes out nearly all of humanity. There's Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed by fire. The plagues of Egypt, which included everything from locusts to the death of the firstborn. And these aren't acts of a benevolent, loving God. They're acts of vengeance and destruction. It's almost like the Bible itself is trying to tell us something. Maybe we've just been interpreting it wrong. The Gnostics would look at those stories and say, of course the world is messed up. It was designed that way. The Demiurge, in their view, wasn't interested in creating a perfect paradise. He created a world of suffering, pain, and control. His goal was to keep humanity trapped in this flawed existence so we'd never reach beyond it to discover the truth. This world isn't a test of our faith, it's a prison. And evil, it's not some mystery we have to blindly accept. It's baked into the system. Now that flips the whole concept of good and evil on its head, doesn't it? We're taught that evil exists because of human free will, because of temptation, or because we're somehow being tested. But the Gnostics saw it differently. They believed the material world itself was corrupted from the start, not because we failed, but because the being who made it was corrupted. So, when people ask, why does God allow suffering? The Gnostic answer is pretty simple. Because the God who rules over this world thrives on it. The Demiurge doesn't care about human suffering. In fact, it's part of his system of control. He keeps us down, keeps us fearful, keeps us worshiping him, while the true divine reality, the higher, pure consciousness beyond all of this, remains hidden from us. What's even more unsettling is how this idea of suffering as control plays out in everyday life. Think about it. How many of our major systems are built around control? Governments, religions, even social norms. They all have a way of keeping us in line, telling us what's right, what's wrong, and why we should be afraid if we step out of line. The Gnostics would argue that this is exactly what the Demiurge wants. A world built on fear and suffering makes for obedient followers. And then there's the idea of punishment. The Bible is full of examples where God punishes people for disobedience. But the Gnostics would say that these punishments aren't about justice or morality. They're about keeping people in their place, making sure they don't question the system. The story of Job is a perfect example. Here's a guy who does everything right, follows all the rules, and yet he suffers horribly, losing everything. Why? Because the Demiurge, the god of this world, doesn't care about fairness. He's all about control. Now this is where we hit the deeper philosophical layer. Yet the creator of this world is flawed. Then the suffering we experience isn't some cosmic lesson in morality. It's not about teaching us to be better or more faithful. It's about keeping us distracted, lost in pain, and too broken to see the bigger picture. This turns the entire concept of faith upside down. Instead of accepting suffering as part of God's plan, the Gnostics believed in rejecting the system altogether. They weren't looking for salvation through obedience or punishment. They were looking for liberation. If we're questioning the nature of God in these ancient texts, then we have to talk about one of the most misunderstood figures in all of religious history, Satan. Now, before you jump to conclusions, hear me out. What if Satan isn't the ultimate evil we've been told he is? What if he's actually the hero of the story? I know it sounds wild, but this idea is way older than you think. In the Gnostic tradition, Satan, or more specifically Lucifer, is viewed very differently. You see, Lucifer isn't this evil being trying to corrupt humanity for fun. Instead, he's seen as the one who offers knowledge, enlightenment, and freedom. And in some interpretations, that makes him the true liberator of humanity. Let's go back to the Garden of Eden. We all know the story. Adam and Eve are living in paradise. Everything is perfect, and they've got just one rule. Don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Then along comes the serpent, who tempts Eve to eat the fruit. Eve does, Adam follows, and boom, they're banished from Eden. But here's the thing. What was the serpent really offering? Knowledge, awareness, the ability to see the world for what it truly is. Think about it. The serpent didn't trick Eve into something meaningless. He gave her, and by extension all of us, the chance to wake up, to see beyond the limits of the garden, to understand the difference between good and evil. That's not some villainous move. That's the kind of gift that opens up a whole new level of consciousness. And if the God of the Old Testament didn't want Adam and Eve to have that knowledge, what does that say about him? This is where the Gnostics come in again. They believed that the serpent in the garden wasn't Satan in the way we usually think of him. Instead, he was a symbol of rebellion against the Demiurge's control. By offering knowledge, the serpent was giving humanity the key to escape ignorance, the very thing the Demiurge wanted to maintain. In other words, Lucifer wasn't the enemy of he was our ally, the one who dared to stand up to the false god and offer us the truth. This flips the entire narrative. Lucifer, instead of being the ultimate figure of evil, becomes a symbol of light. Literally, the name Lucifer comes from the Latin Lucifer, which means the light bringer. He's the one who brings enlightenment, the one who challenges authority, and the one who says, you don't have to live in ignorance. You don't have to accept the world as it is. Now it's important to recognize just how radical this idea was and still is. If you're used to thinking of God as the ultimate authority and Satan as the ultimate rebel, this might feel like a complete reversal of everything you've been taught. But that's exactly why the early church worked so hard to suppress these Gnostic ideas. A story where the rebel is the hero and the creator is the villain. That's a dangerous narrative for any institution that's built on obedience and control. But let's take it a step further. In some Gnostic writings, Lucifer isn't just a symbol of rebellion. He represents a deeper truth about the nature of power and freedom. The Demiurge wants submission. He wants followers who don't question, who don't seek knowledge, who obey without understanding. Lucifer, on the other hand, represents the idea that true power comes from questioning authority, from seeking knowledge, and from breaking free of imposed limits. This is a theme that runs through a lot of mythology and literature, not just in Gnostic writings. Look at stories like Prometheus, the titan who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. He's punished for his defiance, just like Lucifer, but he's celebrated as a hero because he dared to challenge the gods and give humanity something valuable. The fire Prometheus gives is knowledge, just like the fruit Lucifer offers in Eden. It's the same archetype, the rebel who risks everything to bring enlightenment to humanity. What if rebellion against authority isn't inherently evil? What if it's actually the path to freedom? If the Demiurge is a false god who thrives on control, then rebelling against him isn't just an act of defiance, it's an act of liberation, and Lucifer, as the symbol of that rebellion, becomes a figure of empowerment, someone who represents the idea that we don't have to accept the world as it is. We can seek knowledge, we can challenge the rules, we can create our own path. Of course, this perspective has been buried for centuries. It's no accident that Lucifer is painted as the ultimate villain in mainstream religious texts. If you're in power, the last thing you want is for people to question your authority, right? But the Gnostics and many other ancient traditions saw through that. They understood that real power, real freedom, comes from breaking away from control and embracing the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. Let's dive into something even more intriguing, the figure of Jesus, but not the Jesus you might be used to hearing about. In the Gnostic tradition, Jesus wasn't just a savior sent to redeem humanity from sin. He was a messenger sent to reveal the truth about the Demiurge and to help us wake up from the illusion of this world. The Gnostic view of Jesus is incredibly different from what you'd find in traditional Christianity. According to these teachings, Jesus didn't come to reinforce the authority of the God of the Old Testament. In fact, he came to oppose it. He wasn't here to tell people to blindly follow the laws laid down by the Demiurge. Instead, he was offering something much deeper, salvation through knowledge, or Gnosis. And this knowledge wasn't about sin or moral rules. It was about realizing that the material world is a prison and that we need to break free from it. So the Gnostics saw Jesus as more than just a figure of faith. He was a teacher who came to wake people up, to show them that the God most people worship isn't the ultimate source of goodness and light. Jesus was here to say, look beyond the surface. The world you think you know is a trap. In many Gnostic texts, especially the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus isn't portrayed as someone who's focused on performing miracles or preaching about sin and punishment. Instead, he's depicted as a teacher of hidden wisdom. His parables and teachings are cryptic, not because they're supposed to be confusing, but because they're pointing to a deeper reality, one that the Demiurge doesn't want humanity to see. Jesus often spoke about the kingdom of God, but the Gnostics believed this kingdom wasn't some physical paradise we'd reach after death. It was a state of spiritual awakening, something that existed beyond the material world. The Gnostic Jesus didn't care about obedience to religious law. In fact, he often spoke against it. Remember when Jesus was constantly at odds with the Pharisees, the religious leaders of his time? The Gnostics saw this as more than just a disagreement about rules. They believed Jesus was actively rejecting the Demiurge's system of control. He wasn't here to make sure people followed religious dogma. He was here to free them from it. This idea comes through even more clearly in the Gnostic texts that didn't make it into the New Testament. Take the Gospel of Judas, for example. In this text, Judas isn't the betrayer we've all been taught to despise. Instead, he's the disciple who truly understands Jesus' message. According to this version of the story, Judas' so-called betrayal wasn't an act of evil. It was part of a plan to help Jesus escape the prison of the material world. Judas was the only one who really got it, who understood that Jesus' mission wasn't about dying for humanity's sins, but about revealing the truth that would set them free from the Demiurge's control. The Gnostics didn't believe that Jesus' death was about paying for humanity's sins. They saw his crucifixion as a way to demonstrate the ultimate truth, that the material world and even death are illusions. Jesus' resurrection wasn't just a miracle to prove his divinity. It was a statement, a way of showing that the Demiurge's greatest weapon, death, had no real power over those who had attained true Gnosis. For the Gnostics, the real message of Jesus was one of awakening. He wasn't here to save people from their sins through his death on the cross. He was here to save them from ignorance. His teachings were meant to wake people up to the fact that they didn't need to be slaves to the Demiurge's rules, that they could find the divine truth within themselves. And the crucifixion? It wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of realizing that death, like everything else in this world, was part of the illusion. Now, when you think about it like that, the Gnostic interpretation of Jesus changes everything. It's not about following a set of rules or performing rituals to get into heaven. It's about transcending this world, seeing through the veil that the Demiurge has put in front of us, and reconnecting with the true divine source. But this was exactly the kind of thinking that the early church couldn't allow to spread. A Jesus who taught that the God of the Old Testament wasn't the true God, a message that told people to seek enlightenment instead of blind obedience. That's the kind of radical idea that could undermine the entire foundation of institutional religion. And that's why these texts, these alternative gospels, were buried, burned, or labeled as heresy. The Jesus who offered liberation from the Demiurge's system wasn't the Jesus the early church wanted people to follow. They needed a figure who reinforced authority, not one who encouraged people to question it. If you've been following along, you've already seen how the Gnostics flipped the script on God, Satan, and even Jesus. But there's one more key player in this cosmic drama, Sophia. She's not a name you hear too often in mainstream religious discussions, but in Gnostic teachings, she's one of the most important figures. Maybe the most important. In Gnostic belief, Sophia is a divine figure, often seen as the embodiment of wisdom itself. She's part of the higher spiritual realm, far beyond the material world. But here's where things take a turn. According to Gnostic cosmology, she is actually responsible for the creation of the Demiurge. You heard that right. The Demiurge, the being we've been talking about, didn't just come out of nowhere. He was the result of a mistake made by Sophia. Now don't get this wrong. Sophia wasn't acting out of evil or malice. It's more like an accident, something that happened when she attempted to create something on her own, without the guidance of the higher divine forces. In her desire to bring forth creation, she accidentally birthed the Demiurge. And as soon as she realized what she had done, she knew it was a disaster. The Demiurge, thinking he was the supreme being, went ahead and created the material world, the same one we're all stuck in. Sophia didn't just walk away after this mistake. She didn't abandon the world to the Demiurge's control. In fact, she becomes deeply involved in trying to fix it. That's what makes her such a fascinating figure. Sophia represents both the cause of the problem and the force trying to correct it. In some Gnostic texts, she's depicted as mourning for humanity, feeling deep sorrow over the suffering caused by the world her creation has built, but she doesn't give up. Sophia's story is one of redemption, but not in the traditional sense. She's not here to sacrifice herself or take on the sins of humanity. Instead, her role is about awakening. She works behind the scenes to guide humanity toward Gnosis, or true knowledge. It's like she's sending signals, trying to wake us up to the reality that the material world isn't all there is, that we've been trapped in an illusion created by the Demiurge. The Demiurge, being the arrogant, ignorant being that he is, has no idea that Sophia exists above him. He thinks he's the only God, so he has no clue that there's this force of divine wisdom working to undermine his control. Sophia, on the other hand, knows exactly what's going on. She sees the Demiurge for what he is, a flawed creator ruling over a flawed world, and she's trying to help us break free from his influence. One of the most compelling parts of Sophia's story is the idea that we carry a piece of her within us. The Gnostics believe that every human being has a spark of divine wisdom, a fragment of Sophia hidden deep within their soul. It's like this tiny buried treasure that, if discovered, can lead us out of the darkness and back to the true divine source. But the Demiurge has done everything he can to keep that spark hidden. He's built this entire material world, this whole system of control, to keep us distracted so we don't find it. And that's where Sophia's role becomes crucial. She's the one trying to guide us to that hidden spark. In Gnostic texts, she's often seen as a mother figure, nurturing humanity and helping them grow towards spiritual enlightenment. She's not an authoritarian god demanding worship. She's a wise, compassionate force trying to help us wake up. What's really fascinating is how this shifts the whole dynamic of salvation. In the Gnostic view, salvation isn't something that happens because we follow rules or perform certain rituals. It's not even about believing in a specific god or figure. It's about discovering the truth for ourselves. It's about recognizing the divine spark within us and realizing that we're more than just material beings trapped in a material world. And that's what Sophia represents. She's the guide to that truth. She's the one whispering to us, urging us to look beyond the surface, to question everything we've been taught, and to seek the higher reality. In a way, she's the opposite of the Demiurge. While he represents control, ignorance, and deception, Sophia stands for wisdom, freedom, and awakening. In traditional teachings, we're told that the end of the world will bring God's ultimate judgment, a final reckoning where the good are saved and the evil are condemned. But in the Gnostic view, the end of the world isn't about punishment or reward. It's about freedom, the end of the Demiurge's reign and the beginning of humanity's true awakening. In the Gnostic text, the so-called apocalypse isn't a terrifying event where the world is destroyed. Instead, it's the collapse of the Demiurge's false reality. It's when humanity finally sees through the illusion of the material world and reconnects with the true divine source. The apocalypse isn't about God's wrath. It's about the liberation of human souls from the control of a flawed creator. You see, the Gnostics believe that once enough people woke up, once enough of us discovered the divine spark within ourselves, the power of the Demiurge would start to crumble. His control over the material world would weaken because the only reason he's been able to rule for so long is through ignorance. The more people understand the truth, the less power he has. And when that happens, when enough of us break free, this world as we know it will change forever. The Book of Revelation, often seen as the ultimate prophecy of the end times, has been interpreted in countless ways. But from a Gnostic perspective, it's not about the victory of the Demiurge or his final judgment. It's about the fall of the false god. Conclusion: the Gnostic revelation and the liberation of humanity. The discoveries at Nag Hammadi and the Dead Sea Scrolls have unearthed a truth so radical that it shatters the very foundation of mainstream religion. What if the God we've been taught to worship, the wrathful, jealous deity of the Old Testament, is not the true creator, but a false god, a cosmic tyrant known as the Demiurge? What if the world we live in, with all its suffering, chaos, and oppression, was never meant to be a paradise, but a prison designed to keep humanity trapped in ignorance? The Gnostic texts present a vision of reality so different from traditional Christianity that it was deliberately suppressed by the early church. These writings reveal that the Demiurge, the blind and arrogant architect of this material world, crafted a system of control, one built on fear, obedience, and deception. He is not the loving Father of the New Testament, but a usurper, a lesser being who believes himself to be the supreme God, unaware of the true divine realm beyond his grasp. The Great Deception, how the Demiurge enslaved humanity. From the very beginning, the Demiurge sought to keep humanity in chains. The Garden of Eden was not a paradise, but a gilded cage, where Adam and Eve were forbidden from eating the fruit of knowledge. The serpent, far from being a villain, was a liberator, the one who offered humanity the chance to awaken. Yet the Demiurge punished them for seeking wisdom, casting them into a world of suffering, toil, and death. Throughout the Old Testament, we see the Demiurge's true nature, a god of wrath drowning the world in a flood, a god of vengeance raining fire on Sodom and Gomorrah, a god of control demanding absolute obedience under threat of punishment. This is not the behavior of an all-loving creator. It is the behavior of a jailer who fears what will happen if his prisoners ever realize they are trapped. The true divine, beyond the Demiurge's illusion. Beyond this false god exists the true divine source, the ineffable, boundless one, the pure consciousness from which all existence flows. The Demiurge, in his arrogance, does not even know of this higher reality. He believes himself to be the ultimate power, yet he is nothing more than a cosmic mistake, the flawed creation of Sophia, the divine wisdom. Sophia, realizing her error, has worked tirelessly to free humanity from the Demiurge's grip. She is the hidden guide, the voice whispering to us in moments of insight, urging us to awaken. Within each of us lies a spark of the divine, a fragment of the true God that the Demiurge cannot touch. This is why he fears knowledge, because once we remember who we truly are, his illusion crumbles. Jesus, the Gnostic liberator. The Gnostic Jesus was not a sacrificial lamb sent to atone for humanity's sins. He was a revolutionary teacher sent to expose the Demiurge's deception and reveal the path to Gnosis, direct knowledge of the divine. His conflict with the religious authorities was not just about hypocrisy, it was a rejection of the Demiurge's entire system. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." This is the essence of Gnosticism. Salvation comes from within, not from blind faith in a false god. Lucifer, the light bringer, not the devil. The most shocking revelation of all, Lucifer, the so-called devil, was never the enemy. His name means light bringer, and in Gnostic tradition, he is the true liberator, the one who defied the Demiurge to give humanity knowledge. The serpent in Eden, Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, Lucifer's rebellion, all these myths point to the same truth. The real sin is obedience to tyranny. The church demonized Lucifer because it needed an eternal villain to keep people afraid. But in truth, Lucifer represents enlightenment, rebellion against false authority, and the courage to seek truth. The coming awakening, the fall of the Demiurge. The world is changing. The old structures of control, religion, government, media, are losing their grip as more people awaken to the truth. The Demiurge's greatest fear is that humanity will realize, this world is not our home. We are divine beings, not slaves. The true God is not the one demanding worship, but the silent presence within us. The apocalypse, in Gnostic terms, is not the end of the world. It is the end of the illusion. When enough souls awaken, the Demiurge's power will collapse, and the prison of materialism will dissolve. The choice is ours. We stand at a crossroads, continue to worship the false god, living in fear and ignorance, or seek Gnosis, reclaim our divine heritage, and break free. The Gnostics were branded as heretics because they dared to question. Now, their buried truths are resurfacing, and the choice is ours. Will we remain asleep, or will we awaken? The Demiurge's time is ending. The age of human liberation has begun. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. I love hearing from you. Check out more videos on the screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.